Okay, good evening, everybody. My name is Lawrence Walsh. I'm the chair of the Planning Committee. On my right is Councillor Aidan Williams. On my left is Senior Plan Officers. On my further right are officers from Legal, Highways and Democratic Services. Down both legs of the table are members of council who make up this Planning Committee. Before we start, I'd just like to convey a fire safety notice for this evening. If the fire alarm and continuous siren sounds, please could I ask that you leave the building in a calm manner by the nearest fire exit by proceeding left out of the room and down the main stairwell and out of the main civic entrance, which is opposite. Everyone should assemble at the front of the town hall and must not re-enter the building until instructed to do so. If you have a disability which could affect your means of escape, could you please inform a member of staff so that arrangements can be made for your safe evacuation. And we've got some broadcast information. Please be aware that this meeting will be recorded for live and for subsequent broadcast on the Council's YouTube channel. The whole of the meeting will be recorded except where there are confidential or exempt items. This activity promotes democratic engagement in accordance with Section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972. The cameras will focus on the proceedings of the meeting and avoid areas specifically designated for members of the public. If you object to being filmed, please remain seated in the public seating area. All members and officers must use their microphones provided to enable the audio to be picked up by the system. Members are reminded to turn off their microphones when they are not formally addressing the committee. So I'll go through the agenda. Item number 1 is attendances, and we've got apologies from Councillor Morgan. Councillor Evans is substituted for Councillor Morgan, thank you. Apart from that, it's a full house. Item number 2 is declarations of interest. Have any members got any declarations of interest they need to declare? Councillor Patel.
I'd like to declare an interest in Wharf Road. My husband works for the planning agent involved, although he is not directly involved in this application.
Thank you. Any other? Councillor Winston?
Declare an interest in Flixton Road. It's extremely close to where I live.
Thank you. Councillor Evans? And Councillor Proctor?
Thank you, Chair. I previously made representations on the 122 Flixton Road, Urmston application as the ward councillor, so I think it would be appropriate that that comes up for me to leave the room.
Minutes of the previous meeting, would somebody like to move them as a true and correct record?
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bunting. Yes, Councillor.
On the minutes, we made the YouTube version of the last planning meeting is not there. It's missing.
It wasn't webcast, Councillor accordingly, the camera wasn't working, unfortunately. We were all very disappointed about that, but there you go. Okay, item number 4 is questions from members of the public. I understand that no questions have been submitted. Item number 5 is additional information report. There are copies of additional information at the front if members of the public wish to read them. I know members of council, members of committee rather, have got those additional information reports. And item number 6 is applications to develop. Just before we go to that, just a quick reminder to members of the planning committee, myself included, as well as our local knowledge, we look to our local development plan and other background papers listed at the beginning of agenda item 6. I think they should be listed as a basis for our decision making this evening. Okay, so I think that's everything. So if we go to the first application, and that is page 11, Refuse Collection Depot, Wharf Road in Altrincham. Councillor Jerome.
Yeah, Chair, I'd like to recuse myself for this application, as I will be speaking against it as well, and I've been part of a campaign over the last couple of years, so is that okay?
That's fine, Councillor Jerome. Yeah, I'd like to step outside. The first speaker I've got speaking against this is Councillor Coggins. Councillor Coggins, would you like to take a seat? And as per usual, I've forgotten, if you just bear with me, we're going to have an introduction from Mr. Pearson. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Chairman. Full planning permission is sought for the demolition of all existing structures within the site and the erection of a 5-storey apartment building containing 44 1- and 2-bedroom apartments, together with a terrace of 5 3-bed townhouses. This is an amended scheme to that refused at committee in July 2018 for reasons relating to scale, massing, design, and a shortfall in the level of on-site parking provision. Letters of objection have been received from 24 addresses, with many concerns being raised in relation to highways, parking, scale, and housing need. The key changes from the refused scheme are a reduction in the number of units proposed from 99 to 49, a reduction in the height of the tallest section of the apartment building from 7 to 5 stories, the reduction in the total footprint of the development, design amendments to all elevations, and the removal of the basement car park and inclusion of 8 visitor car parking spaces within the ground level car park. Officers consider the scheme to be well designed and of an appropriate height for its location. It is not considered that it will impact adversely on the amenity of surrounding residents, nor is it considered that the scheme will adversely affect the setting of nearby heritage assets, including the non-designated Radium House. 57 parking spaces would be provided within the site, inclusive of 8 visitor parking spaces. Officers consider the access, car parking provision, cycle parking, and surfacing arrangements to be acceptable. It has been noted that in relation to the recent appeal at the former Riley's Snooker Club site, the inspector found the level of parking at a similar ratio to this application to be acceptable. A 10% on-site affordable housing contribution was originally offered, but this has increased to 20%, that is 10 shared ownership units, following viability discussions, as well as the inclusion of a viability review mechanism. Officers are satisfied that this is an appropriate level of affordable housing for this particular development. It is considered that both reasons for refusal on the previous application have been addressed, and this application is recommended for approval. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Pearson. Councillor Coggins, you have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to address the meeting. Councillor Jerome, Councillor Welton and I have been working with local residents in this development and on the overdevelopment in this area for a very long time now. They're clear that this land should be used for housing. However, there are very serious concerns about this application. Concerns include residential amenity, overmassing and change of character, transport and related problems. Moreover, when we're looking at the overall balance, the benefits to be gained from the scheme are less than could be expected. In particular, the housing mix is not what the area needs. And so with greater negative impacts than we might expect and fewer gains than we had hoped for, the planning balance, in our opinion, is not tipped towards permitting this application. In particular, I want to draw your attention to transport and related problems, to the height, massing and scale of the apartment building, and to the lack of genuinely affordable family housing. Residents are very concerned about the increased level of traffic that this development will bring. This needs to be considered as well, along with the cumulative impact, as there is another development currently being built at the other end of Bridgewater Road, very, very close to this. Also, we have to note that the one-way system on Navigation Road and lack of alternative routes in and out of this area provide a unique set of challenges. This development would mean the existing congestion on local junctions and roads would be exacerbated. Also, in particular, we have to remember the A56 bridge, which is the only way in and out of the area to the north. Secondly, we need to consider the height, massing and scale of the apartment buildings. Residents are very clear that they consider a 5-storey apartment building to be completely out of character in this area. This is an area full of 2-storey buildings. Most people we've spoken to think 2 or at most 3-storey buildings would be in character with the existing streets. There are thousands of these in this corner of Altrincham, and residents think that a 5-storey apartment block is not in keeping with the character of the area. In fact, the report that you have in front of you notes at paragraph 24, it discusses the nearby Roberts House. Roberts House, it says, exemplifies the impact that taller buildings can have on the A56 street scene, with the overall balance of the development being traditional and predominantly 2 to 3 storey. So we have some acknowledgement that these very large buildings in this area can have quite a negative impact. The report does note that this new development would be set back from the A56. However, that only means that it's set back from the busy High Street area. It's actually more deeply embedded in the 2-storey residential area. So in fact, that is, in a sense, like an increased issue rather than a decreased issue. Thirdly, we need to look at the lack of affordable family housing. Many residents we speak to tell us they're concerned that their younger family members are struggling to find family housing that they can afford in the area. Trafford's policy L2 tells us we should be aiming for about 30% of units having 3 or more bedrooms, which is referenced at paragraph 11 of the report, whereas this project is only giving 9 out of 49, or approximately 20% of units meeting that criteria. In fact, the report does state that the general concern across the borough is that there isn't a high enough proportion of family houses being delivered. And L2 also tells us that at least 50% of the affordable housing should be suitable for families. However, only 1 in 10, and not so that's 10% rather than 50% of the affordable units in this project would be offered to have 3 bedrooms. And in case you thought that some of the 2-bedroom properties might be suitable for families, unfortunately, we've seen from the report that only 20 out of 24 of them actually meet the national minimum standards for size. So these really are very, very small 2-bedroom units. The housing development statement, referenced to paragraphs 13 to 14, claims that 1-bed apartments like these provide an affordable entry point into the housing market, for first-time buyers. Sadly, this is not the experience of those we speak to, who know that their children are unlikely to be able to buy a home in their own hometown. We're also told that these apartments will attract young professionals who will spend their disposable income in local businesses. However, again, this seems to reinforce the message that this is not about meeting the needs of the local community and their families, but attracting wealthier new residents to the area instead. 20% of the housing provided will be affordable. However, there will be no social or rented affordable units. And we see at paragraph 16 that all the affordable units will be under shared ownership, which means that they will be then sold onto the open market after the initial buyer moves on. So there will be no legacy of affordable housing in the area. So in conclusion, residents feel that they will be left with the difficulties raised by this project and the impact on the character of their area, the amenities and the transport without getting the benefits they need. A community cannot be built by prioritising economic growth over the welfare and needs of those who already live there. What this area needs is high quality, affordable family housing, and sadly this development does not deliver that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Coggins. I'd like to return to your seats. Councillor Welton, would you like to take a seat? And you two have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me today. I speak both as a councillor and as a resident of Navigation Road, just round the corner from this development, on behalf of my neighbours. From the beginning, it has been clear that the developer is intent on overdeveloping this site with substantial numbers of 1-bedroom flats, in contradiction to policy L2.7, which states 1-bedroom accommodation will normally only be acceptable for schemes that support the regeneration of Trafford's town centres and can only be justified in terms of a clearly identified need. This is not Altrincham Town Centre, and there is no clearly identified need. There is a plentiful supply of 1- and 2-bedroom flats in the area, with recent developments including Roberts House, Bridgewater House, Budenberg, Victoria Apartments, and many, many more in the local area and many more in the pipeline. Local residents have been clear from the start that they welcome an appropriate development on this site, in keeping with the existing 2- to 4-bedroom housing in the area, for which there is a huge demand. They are understandably upset to see such houses being built on brownfield sites over the other side of the A56, but not on Wharf. Should such a scheme have been proposed, spades could have been in the ground long time ago, and a satisfactory outcome all well on the way to being achieved. Instead, residents are threatened with a 300% increase in dwellings on this small street and facing significant threats to the street scene, traffic congestion, air quality and parking. The development does considerable visual harm to the street scene when viewed from the immediate south and west, and so fails to comply with policy L7 of the Trafford core strategy and the section 12 of the NPPF. Its 5 stories are over-dominant, out of place in this area of predominantly 2-story housing and 1- and 2-story business units. The SPD2 A56 corridor development guidelines advise that the new development along the A56 should be of a smaller scale and mass to fit within the context of the historic character and form of buildings along the route. This 5-story development clearly contradicts this advice. So does the quality and utility of the accommodation make up for this? Local residents would say it does not. Only 10 out of the units out of the 49 come in the bracket of affordable housing, and none of the houses. No social housing forms part of this scheme. It is also noticeable that only 4 of the 2-bedroom apartments comply with the national internal space standards. They are what one local resident described as posh shoeboxes, and certainly not appropriate for the family accommodation that we so desperately need, and are thus in contradiction with core strategy policy L2.4. These apartments won't fix our housing problems. Doubtless most will be sold to investors as rental accommodation, whereas 3- to 4-bedroom housing would be sold to local families who would be here for the long term. Parking is already a huge issue amongst the tight network of streets between Navigation Road and the canal. The proposed on-site parking provision with regards to spaces to bedrooms is inferior to that proposed in the previous application and that required in the SPD3. To get away with this, the applicant is reliant on the additional evidence submitted concerning likely demand, but this evidence was based on surveys of Budenberg and Woodfield apartments that the council's own statement of case for the appellant has already rejected with respect to the Bridgewater Road Riley's appeal. This application also does not take into a sufficient account the compromised nature of the highway around this development and the risk to road users of all types. The only access to Wharf Road is via turning off the A56, a road famous for congestion, delays, and pollution. There is no traffic light filter for turning right onto Navigation Road. Only 2 or 3 cars turn on each sequence. Meanwhile, there is only room for 4 or 5 cars exiting Navigation Road onto the A56 before the one-way system. This limited space demonstrates how even supposedly an insignificant increase in car movements of 1 every 4 minutes at peak time will certainly contribute to congestion. On Bryan Avenue, Brunswick, Bridgewater Wharf and Newton Road, on-street parking on both sides results in frequent negotiated passes, with cars often driving on the pavement and over curbs to avoid each other. Navigation Road between Brunswick and Harwarden Road is one-way only and is blocked every 5 minutes or so for up to 10 minutes by the level crossing that can cause traffic tailing all the way back down the Navigation one-way system. There must also be account taken of the number of delivery vehicles the development will attract. No turning facility is available, so vehicles servicing the site will have to turn on the street outside or have to reverse round the corner onto Bridgewater Road between parked cars. The Trafford local plan says the development must include space for delivering and collection of goods and/or the picking up or setting down of passengers. Finally, Wharf Road is the proposed site for a cycling and pedestrian bridge across the canal as part of the B network. This will bring significant numbers of vulnerable cyclists and walkers right past this site. We need to ensure this development does not impact on this scheme, as it surely will at its current size and with delivery vehicles expected to turn in the street outside. In conclusion, this development remains far too large and inappropriately sited for the reasons I've previously outlined. I urge you to respect the views of local residents and respect it. Thank you. Sorry for overrunning.
You'd like to switch your microphone on, Councillor Jerome? You have 5 minutes. Thank you.
But it should be sensitive to the local concerns, in keeping with the area, but also aspirational in terms of social, affordable and sustainable housing that enhances the local environment. Residents have expressed concern about a 5-storey block, not in character with the surrounding 2-storey houses, which should be in keeping with the area, as L7 of Trafford's core strategy encourages. This application is none of these things, and as one resident said, if residents' views were taken on board, spades would have been in the ground long ago. Affordable housing. The 20.4% affordable housing element offered here sits well below the 45% required for a hot area and good market conditions. This equates to only 10 units from the 49 apartments, and residents and none on a social or affordable rent basis. The mix of housing also fails in what is a predominantly area of family homes. 40 of the units are 1 or 2 beds, and none will attract young professionals, often transient to the area. The committee report clearly references the core strategy policy L.24, which advocates 30% of small and larger 3-bed apartments suitable for families. This development has only one 3-bed unit and will change the area considerably. L2.11.4 states a need for family housing across the borough. Many apartments buildings for 1 and 2 beds are located nearby, such as Roberts House and Budenberg, and only one 3-bed is affordable in this application. On the on-site parking in the highways, parking remains a major concern and falls short of Trafford's own requirements outlined in SPD 3, parking standards and design. This is gambling on low car parking uptake and small visitor numbers. The car parking provision only reaches 57 spaces, 70% of the maximum standards, of which only 8 are for visitors. Point 72 in the report cites surveys on Budenberg and Roberts House, but these are not comparable. Most residents at Budenberg struggle to afford the expensive car park charges, and Roberts House is still far from full. This application will almost certainly add extra pressure on the tightly knit and quaking infrastructure. Local roads are already clogged at peak hours. Access to Wharf Road is narrow, with poor sightlines both in and out. Newton Road and Brunswick Road have unsuitable for HGV signs displayed, and local services, large trucks and other vehicles all struggle to use Bridgewater without backing up and causing severe delays. Residents will be pleased that the report does add that extra parking can be made available. No extra parking would be made available for the townhouses on Wharf Road, but residents would like that information to have been displayed sooner in this application process. When it comes to the design, the report clearly states the council's adopted planning guidance for new residential development, referred to onwards as PG1, notes that development should complement the characteristics of the surrounding area. This development is way out of scale with the surrounding 2-storey housing type. The townhouses are 3-storey, opposed to 2, and the 5-storey apartments will dwarf nearby dwellings and will not be sympathetic, as the report says. The recent appeal decision on the Riley's application also adds to arguments on effects on the street scene and the nearby heritage assets, such as Radium House. In conclusion, overall, this is an application that will not do enough to provide family homes, which are so sorely needed in the Altrincham area. It will also be at odds with the area's predominantly family homes, and I ask this committee to reject it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jerome. Let's return to the corridor, I think. We've got a speaker in favour of the application, Mr. Davis. Mr. Davis, you'd like to take a seat?
There's another speaker against, Councillor.
Another speaker against, is he here? Yeah. Speaker against it? Could you return to your seat, Mr. Davis, and I'll ask Mr. Coombs to take a seat. And you have 3 minutes, Mr. Coombs.
Is that on now? Yes, that's fine. I'd like to begin by saying that though a further year has passed since I was last in this room, I do want to make it absolutely clear that we residents are not, never have been against a reasonable redevelopment of the Wharf Road depot site. It's simply that nothing has been proposed so far will make a positive enough contribution to our neighbourhood now and into the future. The latest plan to add 49 new residential units breaks down into 41 and 2-bedroom apartments and only 9 3-bedroom accommodations, of which only 5 would actually be townhouses and therefore more in congruity with the current housing. Even with that overmassing, only 10 of the units, or 20% of the total, are to be considered as affordable housing. The current reality is that Altrincham is full of 1 and 2 bedroom apartments, and the ones in this development will in truth end up being let properties. 3 bedroom houses, however, would be bought as family homes, and I would consider it would greatly contribute towards dealing with the genuine housing shortage in the borough. As a personal observation, my neighbour's son has just begun nursery class at Navigation Primary School. His assured future as it stands, if this development goes ahead, will be one of avoiding being run over or choked by exhaust fumes from all the additional vehicles trying to manoeuvre around the junction of Navigation and Wharf roads. This is unlikely to be mitigated by making new school friends from the depot development, as with little provision for family accommodation, there will be few indeed. Its best hope would be that the 3-storey townhouses, which were profitable enough to build in Juliana Way and Baskerville Road, a mere 0.6-mile walk from the same canal side, will house families with children who will attend Navigation Primary School. My elderly neighbour in the Wharf Road sheltered accommodation, who currently crosses Wharf Road by going through the Ginnell between numbers 9 and 11 to avoid encountering traffic from Navigation Road at the tight right-left turn outside number 1, which is my own home, will have to accept that with the proposed development, it'll get that much worse. The current proposal continues to follow the previous redevelopment plans in trying to shoehorn what is effectively a high-density city block right into the middle of urban Altrincham. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Coombs. Mr. Davis.
Good evening, Chair. Thank you for the opportunity to speak in support of this application and the positive officer recommendation. In front of you tonight is an application for new homes that will bring about the reuse of a long-term vacant brownfield site in Broadheath. The revised application follows a community consultation event and extensive pre-application discussions with council officers that have taken place over the last 12 months, and this scheme is very much a result of that collaboration. Officers have concluded that the development of the site is supported by local policy, and there are no objections from key consultees. The development will deliver 49 homes comprising a mix of 1, 2 and 3 bed properties, including 10 affordable units and 5 townhouses. This is a significant contribution to housing land supply and will contribute to reducing long-term pressure on greenfield and greenbelt sites. The proposal has almost halved in size, resulting in a significant reduction in both height and footprint, and therefore the development integrates well with its surroundings. Having listened to members' feedback on the previous proposals and through extensive and detailed negotiations with officers, the applicant has committed to significantly increase the affordable housing offer to 20%, which equates to 10 affordable units, bringing a substantial benefit to the local community. As you will be aware, the site is in a sustainable location, being located within close proximity of Navigation Road Metrolink stop and the A56 quality bus corridor, as well as Altrincham Town Centre. This, combined with anticipated car ownership levels, is considered to justify the level of parking provision proposed. This is the view supported by the local highway authority. The proposals can deliver a number of wider benefits to the borough, which include the delivery of a high-quality residential scheme on a previously developed site, much needed contribution to the council's housing delivery targets, the provision of 10 affordable units, significant job creation during the construction period, as well as increased spending in the area by new residents, and also the delivery of new homes bonus payments, additional council tax receipts, and a significant CIL receipt to the council. Approval tonight will deliver much needed homes in the south of the borough. As such, I respectfully request that members support the officer recommendation for this scheme and approve the application. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. You'd like to return to your seat? Okay, I'm going to ask members. Yes, absolutely, Councillor Evans.
It might be a bit picky. I don't understand why we're being shown the previous proposed development in the slides there, because it's awful. And it gives the impression that you could have had this awful one, but we've got this really lovely one. I don't see the relevance of it. I think that's an error.
No, Councillor, it's not an error. It's usual for us to show a previous scheme if there's been a revision to it. It's not meant as this is what you could have had and this is better. It's for your information so you understand what you're looking at. Thank you.
Yeah, Ms. Coley.
Thank you. If I could, there were some contradictions in what some of the speakers have said around just a couple of points, so just for the committee's benefit. One of the points made was that the parking provision for this scheme was worse than the previous scheme. That's not the case. The ratio is better. And also in terms of housing mix, most of the speakers came up with different numbers. So just to be absolutely clear what it is, there's an apartment building with 44 units in it. Those 44 units are made of 16 one-bed apartments, 24 two-bed apartments, and 4 three-bed apartments. And then there are 5 three-storey townhouses, and they are all 3 bedrooms. So the total number of 3-bedroom dwellings across the scheme is 9. Thank you.
Councillor Barclay.
Thank you, Chair. Could I also, through you, Chair, perhaps ask our Head of Planning if she could also clarify the claims that were made by Councillor Welton? There were various breaches of our policy on planning, because they were mentioned and I'm not sure if they were accurate. Thank you.
I think that's a matter of a difference in planning judgment. We consider this to be broadly in accordance with our policy, such that the planning balance tips. There are specific areas in which it doesn't meet our policy to the letter in terms of affordable housing, ratios, numbers, social rent. That's quite correct. But the report explains that in the situation we have with our housing land supply and with out-of-date housing policies, they do comply with NPPF, and therefore we think it's acceptable.
Happy with that, Councillor Dr. Barclay. Thank you. Would any members like to open the debate? Councillor Bunty.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm far from impressed, I'm afraid, by this site. Councillor Evans pointed out the previous application was pretty ugly. Yes, it was, you're right there, but this one's far from a thing of beauty, I would argue. But then again, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and not quite sure what kind of eyes you'd need to like that, but somebody somewhere might like it, I'm sure. In terms of the actual planning balance itself, if I may turn to that, there have been various points raised by the applicant that this brings, a great many new houses to the, well, not houses, properties to the area, and that it will increase the housing supply. And yes, it will technically, in terms of the actual number of units, but given the fact that they're probably the wrong type of units, you're being offered something that you don't need. You've already got the surplus of these in the area, and what you really need in this area is family homes, which of course this provides, as Mrs. Cody points out, 9. But then again, if this a different design may provide far more than 9, and so. Given the type of accommodations being apprised, I view that the public benefit from this, in terms of the planning balance, is relatively minimal. In terms of the public harm from this, there are perhaps far more things to discuss. In terms of things such as this area is notorious for traffic issues. Absolutely. I mean, when you drive down it, not only is it the serious parking problems in this area, in terms of, try and drive down these roads and you have to really watch your wing mirrors. But there is also huge congestion within this area. Even at relatively quiet times, it's often busy, and in rush hour, it's literally gridlocked. I mean, I have tried to drive down these roads at one time, and not this time, admittedly, but we had a previous application, and I had the day off. I did my planning visits then, and trying to drive into this area anywhere near the rush hour period is just something that you try and avoid at all costs. So this application, given the size of it, will cause significant congestion issues in an area which is already suffering extremely problematic congestion problems, as well as existing serious traffic problems in terms of parking. And I know the officers say that, oh, well, given the number of cars that are owned, this won't be an issue. I find that very difficult to believe, that given the fact that you've only got, for example, 8 visitor parking spaces. Well, it's going to be a very lonely world if, given the sheer number of properties that we have here, if only there are 8 visitors. That sounds like a very unfortunate situation if no one ever wants to visit anybody in this area, maybe because they don't want to drive into it and say, come on to my place instead. I don't know. It's going to be, it's not a traffic area that you'd want to drive into very much. So maybe that is the reason. I'm not sure. Also, the height of this. I know next door there was a building that was refused, and then they appealed, and the appeal was dismissed, and it was said to be too tall, and that was 3 to 7. Well, this is 5, right in the middle of that band. And given the fact that virtually all the other buildings in this area are far lower, especially on that side, okay, there are taller buildings if you're slightly further afield. This, I think, will be somewhat out of character with the area, even with the reduced scale. I'm accepting the fact that the previous one was taller and that this one has shrunk, but I don't think this is, I still think this is the wrong kind of building to have in this area. I'm also concerned, as I've alluded to previously, in terms of the visual amenity afforded by this building. I think it will not only be over dominant and oversized in terms of size, scale, massing, etc., but it will also be a significant visual disamenity to the area in terms of the way it looks. I think it sticks out like a sore thumb, and quite frankly, as I've said already, the design is far from beautiful. So overall, Chairman, given the planning balance, which is what we always have to adopt, I find that the planning positives are relatively minimal. The gains in terms of public gain are very small, and the public harm is, for the reasons I've just outlined, significant. And so I'm going to agree with, and again, it is unusual to have all 3 ward councillors turn up, so obviously the feeling is quite strong there. I'm going to agree with the 3 ward councillors and the residents who spoke, and for the reasons I've outlined already, propose the refusal of this application. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bunting. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. And like Councillor Bunting, if I can also thank the ward councillors, Councillor Coggins, Councillor Welton and Councillor Jerome, as well as Mr Coombs, who have come this evening to provide a bit of a representation on behalf of residents. Like a few of the members of the committee, I was here last year when a previous application for this site came to committee alongside an application for a separate development further up Bridgewater Road, and at that time I had some not insignificant concerns about overdevelopment of the site, about massing and about scale, and about a feeling that that development had the capacity to really significantly change the fabric of the local area. I have to say, upon reading the report, I felt that the developer has tried really quite diligently to revise the application, to work with the council to try and mitigate against some of the worst aspects of the previous application. And I felt somewhat reassured that actually what's before us this evening is dramatically enhanced. In respect of concerns around traffic and parking, I felt that pages 31 to 35 of the report were really robust. And personally, I felt quite reassured by that. Paragraph 27 on page 23 of the report does go some way to try and assuage concerns about the scale of the development. I have to say, like Councillor Bunting, I'm still a bit concerned about the 5-storey block. I did try, and I think it's difficult, isn't it? Because when you're reading an application, it's difficult to try and gauge for yourself an impression of how it's going to impact upon surrounding existing residential properties. I looked at the graphics that the developers provided on the portal, and I note that further on in the report, I think it's paragraphs 50 to 56, officers do go some way to try and suggest that the block itself is going to be set really quite far back from the 2-storey existing residential units. So I still have some concerns about that. I'm going to listen to what other members of the committee have to say about the application in that respect. I wanted to just say that I found the affordable housing offer, actually, I thought the developer's gone some way there. I note that in paragraph 108, it highlights that originally they were suggesting there was only going to be a 10% affordable offer, whereas officers and the developer have worked together to increase that to 20.4% affordable, which I acknowledge is below policy, but clearly some work has been done there to try and get it as high as possible. So I'd commend the council for the work that they've done there. Just thinking if I've made any other notes now. Before I finish my remarks, one thing did jump out at me on paragraph 77. There is a remark about electric vehicle charging points. It just strikes me that one electric vehicle charging point for a development of 49 properties, which is not insignificant development, is actually nothing to exactly pat ourselves on the back about. And I think moving forward, I mean, it's not necessarily for committee to try and change that, but moving forward, I'd like to see the council do a little bit more work really on trying to enhance that standard. So that, I suppose that really just gives an overview of my current thinking on the application. As I said, I'm going to listen to what other members have to say. I feel much better about the application than the previous application that got a refusal. But as I said, I do have some concerns about the 5-storey block. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Ms Cole is going to give us some information.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to clarify, there are actually 6 ECB points proposed. Thank you.
Councillor Evans, would you like to contribute?
Thank you, Chair. Unfortunately, I didn't catch the gentleman's name who was speaking on behalf of the developer, but on paper, he put it over quite well. It ticks all the boxes without a doubt. But if you go and stand on Navigation Road and imagine a 5-storey building there alongside the Victorian terraced houses, it just doesn't sit well. Without a doubt, as Mr. Coombs said, it's a high. It is almost a high-density city block. I totally agree with that, and it should be in Altrincham town centre or in Manchester city centre. Certainly there, what's required is these 3-bedroom houses. It's not for us to dictate what goes on it. We can only judge what's in front of us, but we've got to be reasonable. This building, as with the one for the previous site, will totally change the character of that area. It is a residential area, a family residential area with children going to the schools, with a park just down the road. And this will turn it into, I can't even imagine what it just becomes such high density of single bed, effectively single people. It changes the whole character. And that isn't a tick box exercise. You've got to stand there, understand the area, look at it. So for me, it doesn't work. It is too much. It's the wrong property in the wrong place. So I won't be supporting it, as with my colleague across the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Evans. Councillor Minnis.
Hi. So I had a look at this for quite a while and pondered, obviously. Now, the first application that came in previously, I agree, I can't believe that was even proposed, to be honest. This is obviously a vast improvement, but still nowhere near what I would. I know we can't. You know, it's not a matter of whether you like the look of it or not. But the main concerns I had was actually about transport. So you know the way in and out effectively is so the roads are so small. How can they take that level of traffic? You're going to land up with a lot of congestion. You're going to land up with, you know, if you know, you can't change the road infrastructure. I had a look at even, you know, some ideas of how one could improve it, and I don't think you can. The affordable housing part, I have concerns about here, because when obviously we're wanting 45% here. And what's being was offered was obviously a lot lower, and then when it's been rejected, it's gone up a bit, because obviously, you know, it's clearly a bartering game here. I don't think that really we should be, if you then accept 20% as being okay, what kind of precedent does that set for the future? We'll have, you know, umpteen applications coming in saying, well, actually, you know, 20% is clearly what the council is willing to accept. I don't think that that's the right way to go. What's the point in having 45% there if you're going to accept 20? I have concerns about, obviously we have, you know, planned ideas with the cycle network. I do cycle. I know a number of people that cycle where I work, and around this area. And we don't want to be. We're trying to encourage better habits, shall we say, rather than let's congest all the roads and have no way in and out. I'm inclined not to support, I'm afraid. Not the right housing, not the right place. Another place, yes, fine, not here. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Minnis. Councillor Dr. Barclay.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I'm actually going to support this application because we absolutely desperately need houses or homes, I should say, for people within the borough. We know that's an absolute priority for the council. And we know that the application is going to provide 1-bed flats, 2-bed flats, and 3-bedroom flats, as well as 5 3-storey townhouses. And we have heard from the councillor speaking against the application that these were not suitable for family homes. But we don't live in an era where everyone has a nuclear family. We have families coming in all shapes and all sizes, and we can't say what would appeal to a person or a family. It might well be that 1-bedroom flat is great for a family home. Could be that a 3-bedroom flat is great. I don't think we can say these are not suitable family homes. Our families come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. I am very pleased about the 20% affordable housing too. I think that's really to be welcomed. We can't always reach the 45% that we aspire to. And I think we've often seen here levels lower than that. And I think it's to be really pleased about that the developer has increased it to 20%. So that is appreciated, and that will give a number of people who couldn't come into the borough the opportunity to live here. We also always say how important it is that we make use of our brownfield sites. This is a brownfield site. We want to protect our very precious green belt. This is an ideal site to develop homes, and it's not to be wasted. We need homes. We have to look at brownfield sites. They're the ideal places to start. And obviously, I do understand the concerns of residents about traffic. I've been down there. I know it's really, really busy. But we have information in the report that's come from our very hardworking, reputable highways department that says that in modelling terms, we will only see 28 extra two-way trips during peak time. That's 1 extra vehicle. It says in the report every 4 or so minutes. Yes, obviously that's an increase. We don't want to see increases at all, but we don't live in a frozen landscape. We have to have development. I think for 28 extra trips in peak times, I think that will barely be noticed. And I think we also really need to bear in mind that the Planning Inspectorate has already looked at an application that was very similar to this and did not say that it failed on highways impact. And this was a very, very similar thing. It failed for another reason. It was not due to highways impact. So for me, that's a very strong indication that should this go to appeal, we would not win it on that particular aspect. Although I do understand the concerns, but we have to be really pragmatic about what the modelling has shown us and what the Planning Inspectorate has guided us to believe. So I'm going to support the application. I think beauty is in the eye of the beholder. I think that houses and flats are homes for any family. A family can move into anywhere. We need to use our brownfield sites. We need to get homes for poor people within the south of the borough. And for all those reasons, I'm going to support the application. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Dr. Barclay. Councillor Cordingley.
Just briefly, very much agree with what Councillor Barclay said in terms of the massing and the application itself. The one thing that I am troubled about is the lack of family homes within the affordable element. That really worries me in the sense that we're just giving affordable homes to single people. I think it's families that need them more than anybody. But I don't think there's a consensus about that element. In terms of its size, It's on the canal. It's roughly the size of a sort of Victorian warehouse, which is presumably what it's done. It's got excellent transport connections with the Metrolink, with the Bridgewater Way cycleway. I'm finding it really hard to agree with any of the highways issues because of that. It's got alternatives. So the one element that does trouble me is the affordable housing element. But having said that, I've got to have certain amount of faith in the negotiating skills of our officers, and they have tried to improve that element, and it seems we are where we are. So reluctantly, I'm going to say I'll buy that. I'll support the application.
Thank you, Councillor Accordingly. Councillor Carey.
Thank you, Chairman. I won't be very long. I will be supporting this application tonight based on a few things. The green belt, that's my main thing. If we would win an appeal, if we did decide to dismiss this, I don't think we would. This report is really detailed. I really do understand the problems of the traffic around there, and the congestion and the on-street parking, but on balance with the strength of the report, and we need to protect the green belt, and I don't think we'd win an appeal, I will be supporting this application, and I think they're quite pretty.
Thank you, Councillor Carey. Anybody else like to comment? Councillor Proctor.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Very similar to Councillor Carey, really. Although I am very disappointed about the affordable housing aspect of it. I don't think 20. There's been some compromise, but I don't think that is enough. It's very disappointing, and the fact that there's no social housing in that is also extremely disappointing. But I think the developer has tried to accommodate the concerns in many ways. So I think that actually has been addressed in some respects. I think the congestion issue is of real concern, but I was reassured by what the Highways Department has said in there too, in terms of the impact. It could well be more than that, but I'm prepared to go on what they're saying and agree with that. So overall, I think we need to look at a balance, whether it's whether the public benefit outweighs any harm, and I think overall it would do. We need brownfield sites, as has been said, for housing in the borough, irrespective of the fact that it's not quite the level of affordable housing that I would have wanted. So I think overall, with some regrets and some concerns, I will agree with this. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Proctor. Anybody? Councillor Winstanley.
Yeah, I'd just like to echo what Councillor Proctor said. I had some concerns about the development. I have concerns about the lack of social housing as opposed to affordable housing, but I think the developers at least gone some way with the affordable housing offering. There are some concerns around congestion in that part of Altrincham. I know it quite well. It's quite congested, but again, it is close to main transport routes. That should go some way to mitigate that. And overall, on balance, I think I'll be supporting the application.
Thank you, Councillor Winstanley. I don't think it's been proposed and seconded on any particular motion. Does anybody? Councillor Bunting.
Just confirming, Chairman, as far as my memory is, it's been proposed on both sides, but no seconding on either.
Would anybody like to propose? You propose we need a seconder for Councillor Bunting. Councillor Evans? And seconded by Councillor Evans that we grant this that we refuse this application rather. All those in favour of
Chairman, we had to have
before you begin, Councillor Bunting, can I say on the highways issues, I know Councillor Minnis and a number of members have talked about the highways issues. We have a report from our highways department that the network can take those properties. I know those residents are concerned for highway safety, and I've talked in the past in this room about Navigation Road, turning left into Wharf Road. I know how busy it is, but the highways report stacks up. We cannot disregard that highways report, and the highways report tells us that the network can take this application. I don't say that easily. That's a fact. The applicant has gone away and looked at the previous application, and he has halved it in size. It was twice the size that it was. It was 99 units, and he hasn't appealed. He's come back, and he's halved the size of this application. He has made it reasonable. I looked to the photo montage, as they call it, the views on Wharf Road, the views from Chester Road and the Bridgewater Canal, and I do not think it's overmassing. Councillor Welton, I can't bring you in. With respect, I can't bring you in. I can't bring you in. Thank you. I don't think it's hideous. I don't think it's out of proportion with the area. I don't think it's out of proportion with the street scene. I genuinely say that to you. We've had a look. Remember, we looked at the previous application, and what we've got now is something we can work with. Now, around affordable housing, we have an officer, we have someone employed by the council who works to get affordable housing the best that we can. Councillor accordingly alluded to that. And we have brought in millions and millions of pounds into the borough because of that gentleman's work. And we talked about it at training last week or the week before. And I am confident, 100% confident, that he has squeezed as much affordable housing as he can out of this application. We always want more. We always want family homes. We always want gardens. We always want this one. But the reality is we can't demand. It's not a wish list. So I didn't want to speak because I sometimes I feel as the chair, I don't want members of the public to see that I'm trying to sway the committee, but I do feel strongly about those issues. And what started me off talking about it is Councillor Bunting, I think he's going to allude to highways issues. That would not stack up at appeal. A highways issue would not stack up. You cannot disregard the report. I've done it in the past in this committee, I may say, and the council have had costs taken away from them because of that. You cannot ignore what's in the report. So I say to Councillor Bunting, when he's given his reasons for proposing that we refuse application, he needs to think very, very carefully. He's been in this position before, and he's very experienced. Thank you, Councillor Bunting.
The only thing I would add to that, Chairman, if I may, just to contradict slightly, is that, as Mrs. Coley has pointed out on previous occasions, highways is a consultee to the planning application process. On other applications where highways has said this is completely unsuitable, for example, the Hesketh Road one not that long ago, planning said, we accept what you're saying, but we disagree with you. Now, if we can do it one way, we can do it the other. I am not disregarding, to use the words you used, anything. I am taking all that information into account. I may disagree with some things in the way that that planning have disagreed with highways in the past, when highways said this is not suitable, but the planning application should not go ahead on highways grounds, and planning has turned around and said, well, thank you very much for your consultation, Mr. Highways man. I disagree with you, and we're going to recommend grant anyway. That happened not that very long ago, Chairman. So I accept that highways have made their view clear. I am not disregarding anything. I may disagree, but I am not disregarding, and the two are worlds apart. I have listened carefully in the past when our highways officer has spoken. I have read his words carefully. On this occasion, I may not agree with him, but I am not, under any circumstances, disregarding anything. Just to make that point clear, if I may, before I make, because I do believe that highway, not parking issues, as was in the previous one, when it was the inspector referred to parking. I am not referring to parking. I am referring to the congestion and road safety issues, because that area is a nightmare at the moment. It is an area to avoid at all costs at rush hour if you can. And if you live there, and if you live on one of the existing roads.
Councillor Bunting, we need the reasons, Councillor Bunting, with respect, we need the reasons for refusal. Please, can you list those reasons for refusal?
The reasons I'm going to give for refusal is size, scale, massing. That I believe this is an over-dominant feature. I also feel it will represent, due to the type of design used, a visual disamenity to the area, in that it will look completely out of place and alter the character of the area. Those are my principal reasons, but I am also including the fact that not parking, but congestion issues, except that it's a relatively small number. One every 4 minutes is not a insignificant though, and given the fact that the area is at breaking point at the moment, I feel that is an unacceptable increase. So I am including that, but it is not my principal reason for refusal, which is as I've just outlined. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Evans, you're happy to support that. Thank you. Thank you.
The previous application was not refused on the basis of congestion. It was refused on the basis of a shortage of on-site car parking provision. To introduce that reason in terms of congestion on a smaller scheme puts the council at a significant risk of an award of costs. So my recommendation was, if it is going to be recommended for refusal, that you stick to the scale and massing reason.
Councillor Minish, you'd like to comment?
Just a quick question. So about the affordable housing, and obviously we have a target, or is it a target, or is it a rule, or what it is at 45%? And we're saying that we're willing to accept 20. It does then set a precedent really across the board to developers that they can actually get away with 20%. We also, point 112 here, it says that it's about it not being viable to go any higher. So we did have our training the other week, and we saw how it was, in what order things seem to be prioritised. It seems to me, certainly, the profit margin, which is what, where the viability part comes in, is set before they take their cream, if you will, before they pay their liabilities to the council. So I'm not sure what, and it was the profit margin was, we were told, is not a thing to be a set amount. So I just wonder whether can the levels of 20% be higher? If they can't be, why do we have 45% in our rules? Thank you.
Ms. Coley would like to comment.
Certainly. The first thing to say is that the 20%, if we accept 20% on this scheme, it doesn't set a precedent unless somebody brought exactly the same scheme with exactly the same viability assessment. We are assessing a site-specific, development-specific viability assessment. So there are particular circumstances that they can't get to the 45% in this particular case, but our policy does say where schemes can't viably get to 45%, then a lower amount is acceptable. So, and we have got to the point where we do think that we have got the maximum possible from the scheme. It's also important to note that if the developer does make more money than they say they're going to make, then there's in fact, there are 2 viability reviews at I think 75% of the scheme and on the final disposal of the unit. So we would be able to claw back a proportion of any of that additional profit. So it's not the end of the matter at 20% if the scheme is more viable than they say so. We have pushed them as far as we can. It's our viability consultants' view that a greater level of affordable housing, they would walk away, they just wouldn't do it. There is a point at which the amount of profit, although 20% is not necessarily that's a number that's put about, and it isn't necessarily the amount of profit that a developer will accept. There is a point at which they will walk away, and we think we've got to that point.
Thank you, Ms. Coley. I don't want to open the debate, Councillor Minister. I know you've got very strong views on this, but we were trying to move to a vote. So Councillor Bunting has given his reasons. I don't think Ms. Collins is too happy with them. I'm a bit concerned about them, but he's given his reasons. I'm going to move to a vote on that. We move in second that we refuse this application. All those in favour of refusal, please show. And those against? Okay, we need, if in a proper motion, if you like, would someone like to, I'll propose that we grant this application. Seconded by Councillor Dr. Barclay. All those in favour of granting this application, please show. And those against? That application has been granted. Thank you, everybody. We're going to go to page 93. That's 122 Flixton Road in Urmston. And we have Councillor Harding. Councillor Harding, would you like to take a seat? Councillor Proctor stepping out the room. Councillor Winstanley stepping out of the room, having declared an interest. Before Councillor Harding begins, Ms Cole is going to give us a briefing on this item.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a few words about the application. It relates to the ground floor of 122 Flixton Road in Urmston and includes an area of the forecourt in front of the premises. It's for a variation to the opening hours of the cafe or restaurant and for external seating on the forecourt. Prior approval was granted for a change of use to a cafe or restaurant in May 2018. The currently approved opening hours are 11 in the morning till 10 at night, Sunday to Thursday, and 11 in the morning till 11 at night on Friday and Saturday, and that no external seating is permitted. The proposed opening hours are 11 till 11, Sunday to Thursday, and 11 till midnight on Friday and Saturday, and to enable customers to occupy an external seating area between 11 o'clock in the morning and 9:30 at night. Following the advice of our colleagues in pollution and licensing, discussions with the applicant resulted in the proposed hours of openings being reduced to those that I've just set out. Between 11 Monday to Saturday and 11 till 10:30 on Sundays, and then a restriction from 11 till 9 on for the seating area on any day. Having considered everything in the balance, the suggested revised hours of opening and the external seating area, officers don't consider that would result in undue harm to the residential amenity of the occupants of surrounding properties by reason of noise or disturbance, such to refuse planning permission. There have been no objections to the proposal from the local highway authority. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Harding, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I've been approached by several residents in Urmston, and obviously as a ward councillor, they have asked me to call this decision in and speak on their behalf. So I met a couple of weeks ago with residents of Legwood Court, that's very loud, which is a property just across from the proposed application. I do accept that some of the concerns that residents have raised are projections about what might possibly be concerns, really. And I think I said that I would come here tonight to seek some reassurances and some guidance from committee and the applicant as well in relation to the concerns that the residents have raised. So the proposed site is in a residential area, and Legwood Court, where most of the residents have raised the concerns from, tends to be quite an older people's residence, really. So the concerns they have raised is some assurances around noise nuisance, antisocial behaviour, in relation to this premises will serve alcohol. I think there have been some concerns raised that there was some advertising on social media that the applicant was looking for bar staff, but that the approval was for a cafe/restaurant, not a bar. So I just think it's some real robust assurances that that remains the case. So really it is about the closing of the premises, the time, the noise nuisance. Also, the residents have raised concerns about any external lighting that may well be there. And I have read in the guidance that planning permission would be required for some mounted external lighting. So it's some apprehension about how these premises will function in what is a residential area. One of the things I did approach the applicant about was that it might be good to do some community engagement and actually speak to some of the residents and give assurances that working in this area, he would make sure that none of the concerns they raised came to fruition, or that he would work with the residents to ensure that if they did, they would be resolved. And I think those are really all the points that the residents have raised. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Harding. If you'd like to return to your seat. Do we have Mr. Fletcher? Mr. Fletcher, if you'd like to take a seat. And you have 3 minutes, Mr. Fletcher. Thank you.
Hi. Right, I don't know what I'm going to say because I don't know what to do here. Just going back to what Councillor Harding said, I have spoken in great depth to a lot of the residents on Glenhaven Avenue, which runs behind the premises, and some of the people along the front. Because when I first started the development, there was some concern it was going to be a disco bar and there's going to be fights. And it's not. It's a little bistro, family-friendly bistro. Obviously, it's south-facing. It's got a massive pavement area, so it'd be silly not to utilise the area out front because I don't know anybody that doesn't like to eat al fresco and sunshine in this country, which isn't very often. On the matters of noise and parking and everything else that seems to be coming up, it won't make any difference. There's parking restrictions there, and at night time when everybody's home from work, the roads are full anyway. And I'm hoping it is going to be neighbours and residents that use the place, you know, walking to and from Mermston and everything like that. There's been no, as it says, no objections from planning, environment, street workers, highways, or anybody like that. They were all happy to grant, apart from the 4. We've had 6 objections, 2 councillors and 4 written from 4 neighbours, and the councillors would, you know, agreeing with the residents. But as far as all their concerns, everybody I spoke to now, there isn't a single one person that's really had any concern. Because at first there were, you know, most of Glenhaven Avenue were really a bit concerned about noise reverberating down the avenue, and it's going to be a bar. Yes, I did advertise the bar staff, but the bar staff was to cover the bar area of the bistro, you know, to cover that area. I've got a full-time cook. The kitchen is bigger than the beer cellar, so I don't know why people are saying, you know, that it's such a tiny little kitchen. If it's going to be a bar, it'd be the other way around. I wouldn't have a kitchen, I'd have a big beer cellar. I've spent over £6,000 on the kitchen. I'm hoping to offer some really nice, easy food, you know, because it is a tiny little shop. I mean, by the time you've got your toilets and all your other areas in, there isn't a great deal of room. But all the way through this, I've tried to be a good neighbour with them all because I live above the premises and I've got quite friendly with a lot of them. And to be honest with you, they're all quite excited that it's going to be opening next week. Nobody has spoke to me about any concerns. All the concerns seem to be done through either paper or through the councillors. So I've not had a chance to speak to these people, you know, especially in Legwood Court. But like I say, all the way along, I've tried to, you know, keep it as nice as I can because, you know, it's going to, as the environmental officer said, I'm not selling cheap alcohol. It's craft beers that's going to be sold, you know, on the alcohol side. Strictly over 25s, aiming it at the 30+ people, unless they've got families.
You've had your 3 minutes, Mr. Fletcher. Is that okay? Can you sit down? Thank you. You'll return to your seat. Thank you. Would any members like to comment? Councillor Dr. Barclay.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, I'd really like to say I really appreciated Councillor Harding coming this evening and really kind of trying to broach reassurances for the residents and working at the same time with the applicant. I'm sure she realises and recognises it's really important that successful business in Urmston is able to flourish, but at the same time, it's very, very nice and reassuring that Councillor Harding is obviously determined to find out that her residents are going to be protected from noise and disturbance. I can understand those concerns, but having read the report, the pollution and licensing officer has reduced the hours to the hours that she feels are reasonable, and I think it's good that those have been accepted by the applicant. And of course, we always have the backup reassurances that should those conditions be breached in any way, we can call upon pollution and licensing to come and investigate. So I'm sure the applicant realises that they're important, they're meaningful, and they have to be abided by. So I think that's very reassuring and very reasonable. And I would just say that I really admire businesses, small businesses flourishing within the borough, and I will be happy to support the application. Obviously reassured that the applicant's going to minimise noise. Perhaps I could make just one recommendation if possible. It may not be something the applicant would like to take up. If you haven't spoken to residents in Ledwood Court, perhaps it would be nice to invite them over for a coffee and have a chat. I don't know if that's something you would like to do, but I know it would reassure me as a committee member. Okay, well, I'll leave that with you. I'm not sure if committee support that view, but I'm very happy to support your application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dr. Barclay. Anybody else? Councillor Patel.
Thank you. Thank you to Councillor Harding for reflecting her residents' concerns. And like Councillor Barclay, I would urge the applicant to take up her offer to set up a meeting with the residents of Ledwood Court. I'm quite reassured by the planning negotiated reduction in the hours that use the front of the street. It is actually quite a wide part of the road there, and the pavement is wide, and the Ledwood Court is set back some way. So I'm reassured that that disturbance won't be too great. I'm also reassured that the rear yard has been restricted from any sort of use, which I think would protect the residents on Glenhaven. Yeah. And there's similar businesses 200 odd metres up the road in Urmston, and it's a reflection, I guess, of the success of the town centre that these developments, these businesses are prospering. And yep, so if you could just reassure your immediate neighbours, that would be a positive thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patel. Anybody else? Councillor Cordingley.
Thanks, Chair. I took a trip down to this address on Saturday night. I thought it would be a good time to see it at about 9:30. I know technically it's described in the report as not being town centre, but in reality it's part of Flixton Road and it's very much at the edge of that. My one concern, and I think it's only a slight concern, is that actually I don't really want to see the centre of Urmston Town nightlife moving from where it is at the moment. It's very much focused on the crossroads of Urmston with the, I forget the name of it, but it used to be the furniture shop at the corner of Higher Road. That seemed to be where the activity was in Urmston on Saturday night. This area is quite quiet. In some ways, I can understand the residents really wanting to keep that, but I don't think, with it not being in the town centre and no sort of master planning, I don't think I've got any planning authority to do any of that, to actually try to manage where bars are, because technically it's not in Urmston town centre, so it's just a suburban bar, and I don't think I can influence it at all. I've got some doubts over it, but I think I have to support it because there's no planning reason to oppose.
Thank you, Councillor Cordling. Anybody else? Have you moved and seconded it, Councillor Dr. Barclay? Councillor Cordling, happy to second it. Moving and seconded that we grant this application. All those in favour of granting, please show. Those against? That is unanimous. The application has been granted. Thank you, everybody. We're going to go to page number 80. That's 42 to 44 Brook Road. We have Councillor Thomas, who's going to speak to this application. Before you begin, Councillor Thomas, we have an introduction from Ms. Coley.
Thank you, Chairman. The site consists of a detached building with an external courtyard, which is in operation as a cafe on the ground floor and a function room on the first floor. Currently permitted hours of 8 o'clock in the morning till 10 o'clock at night. The rear yard has external seating, and that has permission to function between 8 in the morning and 6 in the evening currently. The application proposes to vary these conditions to enable the main building to function between 8 in the morning and 11 at night on Monday to Saturday, and Sunday opening between 9 in the morning and 10 at night. It also proposes to allow the use of the external seating area in the yard between 8 in the morning and 7 at night on any day. For the yard, the opening hours were reduced from the originally proposed time of 9 o'clock in the evening, further to environmental health raising a concern. We've had letters of objection from 15 neighbouring addresses, and the key consideration for this application is the impact on residential amenity. In terms of the revised proposal, the Council's environmental health officers have raised no objections, and given the detached nature of the property and the separation to neighbours, and that there are existing conditions requiring windows to be closed during amplified entertainment, it's considered the extension of hours would not have a harmful impact on the neighbours. This is further mitigated by the fact there's an open passageway between the ground floor rooms, and an additional condition has been imposed to restrict the use of the rear part of that passageway after 10 o'clock, again to protect neighbouring amenity. The use of the rear yard till 7 o'clock is considered reasonable, as this is generally recognised as the start of evening hours, and effectively at 7 o'clock it would be limited to daytime hours of use. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Thomas, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I'm speaking on behalf of the residents that are against this proposal. The reason being, again, as outlined, the general noise, the proximity to certainly number 2 Briar Close, number 4 Briar Close, number 36 and 34 Brook Road. It has massive impact. Number 36 Brook Road at the moment closes its windows during the time that anybody is outside smoking, because the smoke rises and goes into their houses. The noise from people, not general musical noise, the noise from the people that sit in the rear yard travels into the gardens along Briar Close and again along Brook Road, meaning that a peaceful evening in the garden is not really an option for the residents close by. Also in the area, there is it would exacerbate the parking problem. There is a large problem on Brook Road, not down to the cafe bar specifically, but also down to the businesses at the top of the road, the chip shop, etc., and the overflow from the residents' parking scheme, which means that Brook Road is dangerous, shall we say, because of the parking across pavements, across driveways. It's also exacerbated by residents not having parking issues on Briar Close, where visitors to the cafe bar and the shops park on the pavement regularly. I went past today at 3 o'clock. There were 3 cars parked on the pavement at Briar Close and 2 cars outside 44 and 42 as I passed on the parking on the pavement. Going on with other things, the deliveries cause issues for the residents on Briar Close, which is a very, very small cul-de-sac. It won't take large vans to go down there. You can't turn around the corner. The actual end to the cul-de-sac isn't wide enough, and deliveries have been in the past affected before 6 o'clock in the morning, causing noise and disruption to, again, Briar Close. And the residents, as you can see from the concerns that they've arisen from their objections, they're pretty much totally against the application. This application was refused about 3 years ago as an A4 use. This planning committee took it down to A3, and the licensing, it was non-alcoholic at the time. Last year they had a license for selling alcohol, and this is just another erosion back to get this to use as A4. We all welcome successful businesses in Flixton, but we also have to recognise the impact that we need to protect residents from impacts of businesses. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. I'd like to return to your seat.
If I could, yes. If I could just confirm that the committee have never refused a planning application for this particular use. We may have negotiated amendments, but there's not been a refusal. Thank you.
Any members wish to comment? Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. All I wanted to just remark on is I think it's a bit of a shame that there isn't anybody to speak in favour of the application this evening, because I know that concerns between the concerns of residents have been rumbling on with this site for, it seems to me, years now. I think Councillor Thomas has been talking about issues at the site pretty much since his election, essentially. Am I right in saying that there's no one to speak to the application?
Nobody booked in to speak. I'm sorry, madam, I can't bring you in at this late stage. Right, okay. That is noted, thank you.
I just think it would have been nice to hear sort of the other side of the argument, because we don't see many applications of this sort at committee. So the report is necessarily quite short, I think, because it's essentially about a change of use. So I suppose I found it a little bit difficult to balance both sides of the argument. So, but if anyone else has anything to contribute, then I'll factor that into my assessment, I suppose. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Minnis.
Hi. So I had a look at this one and I was trying to work out, obviously, there's a number of objections and certain parts of certain objections. So one was obviously about noise and obviously the residents that are very nearby. I've come up with some solutions. So, you know, rather than just giving problems, maybe have some solutions. So would sound baffling be something that would be an idea to try and reduce the sound at the back? So like an anechoic chamber type style thing where you have, you know, it basically traps the noise, so it doesn't actually go, you know, create noise outside. That's one idea. There's also, as part of the objections, they saw about deliveries and deliveries being at 3 a.m. I don't know if that's true or not. If that is true, I think that's obviously not going to be appropriate for people living nearby. Can there be some restrictions on times for deliveries to a place? So that's it for now. Can I, if I have answers to that, that'd be grand. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Minnis. Can I say, Councillor Minnis, that we do look at the application as it stands, and your suggestions are very well made around the soundproofing, but it's not for this committee to chip. You are trying to help. I'm grateful for that. But we judge the application as we see it in the report, and we're reading the report. The issue around early deliveries, I'm sure we can take that to another department. Anybody else like to comment? Councillor Bunting, sorry, yes, you want to comment.
Thank you, Chairman. Like Councillor Minnis, I have a couple of suggestions as well, although hopefully mine will be acceptable because it's simply varying the conditions rather than introducing new structures and what have you. And whilst I'll be honest with you, I have no specific objection to the application as it is. Just one minor disagreement, if I may have, with your Vice Chairman. It's a variation of condition, extending the hours. It's not a change of use, this application. So, but in terms of noise and in terms of smoke from smokers and irritation that may cause, I just wanted to clarify through you, of course, Chairman, if I may ask Mrs. Curley. Obviously, we're restricting the use of the courtyard because of noise impact. Now, if you were to simply vary the condition restricting the use of the courtyard, you wouldn't have tables and chairs out there. But if you said that it was allowed to be used simply for a smoke break during the opening period, i.e. no tables and chairs out there, but smokers could go into the courtyard to have a smoke rather than going to the front of the property, and that would simply be a variation on condition, and that would appear to me to alleviate one of the main problems that appears to be a bugbear to the local neighbours. So it's not introducing any substantive change to the application in terms of structure. It is simply varying the conditions, which we can do. So is there any reason, may I ask Mrs. Coley, through you, Chairman, of course, that we could not vary that condition to allow the courtyard to be used for the duration of the premises opening for the sole purpose of going out for a smoke break, not to have tables, chairs, etc.?
Unfortunately, yes, Councillor Bunting, as that's not an enforceable planning condition, because we could not have an enforcement officer stood out there checking that everybody going out there was simply going out for a cigarette and not for a drink. That's something that possibly could be controlled through the licensing process, but not through planning.
Well, could you have the area open and used but without tables and chairs? Because that would naturally limit people. If people want to go and stand outside for 10 minutes and have a drink, then I suppose that's not, but that would still drain away the significant problem at the front of the building. If you simply said no tables and chairs to be, which is, I suppose, an enforceable thing because people could report that.
It's actually our view as officers that the main concern about this premises is the activity at the rear, which is why it's more restricted, because you have garden boundaries at the rear as opposed to front boundaries, so you'd expect a higher level of amenity. I would be uncomfortable with any extension of the hours of use of the courtyard at the rear for any purpose.
Well, in that case, you can't blame a man for trying. In that case, Chairman, I'll simply say that given the very reasonable limit, the reason why they need to extend the use of the hours is simply to allow them to hold functions, which is internal to the building. And I don't think that would cause a significant issue. I will simply propose grant the application as is, rather than trying to amend the application to improve it slightly through the conditions. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bunting. Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Chair. I'm quite saddened that the owner couldn't get any councillors to advocate on their behalf. I think we need to give businesses as much oxygen as possible in these times. The high street is dying around us. Now, this isn't High Street, but I'm familiar with this property. I'm shocked. I'm familiar with this property over the last 35 years. You hardly believe it, would you? And it was horrendous for decades, as I won't say boarded up, but really ugly. And I think it's been transformed to quite a nice, you wouldn't be upset to live across the road from it. And I think we need to give these people as much oxygen to make as much money as they can and get the business viable. And realistically, looking at the report here, the Environment, Health and Pollution team have no objection. So if they'd have had complaints from residents, then I would expect it to show in that report. They've obviously not had complaints from residents, despite the fact that we've got claims. If they report this stuff, then our environmental health and noise people can take some action, but it patently not been any level of complaints because it would be in the report. So I would certainly support this application for these owners of this property.
Thank you, Councillor Evans. Councillor Winstanley.
I'd just like to speak against the application. This feels like a steady chipping away at the concerns of the residents on that street. It is a residential street. There was no license when the cafe first opened. Now there's a license, and now there's an application to extend the opening hours. I've got no objection to people making money in the cafe, but it just feels like a step too far as the residents are concerned.
If I may.
Yeah, Ms. Cole is going to give us some information.
Thank you. In response to Councillor Evans' point, there was a complaint made to licensing last week that the external area was being used till 8 o'clock in the evening. Obviously, that is in breach of the condition, would be in breach of the condition now proposed. However, that would be a matter for enforcement were that to happen, but there has been a complaint that we are aware of, yes.
Anybody else want to comment? Councillor Dr. Barclay.
Thank you, Chairman. I think we're a little bit in danger of rewriting a planning application that's before us. I mean, we have to just take the application as it is stated, and basically it's a request for extending opening hours and allowing the use of the yard area. And we've heard from the officers in the report, they're perfectly satisfied with the hours that have been suggested by our pollution and licensing officer, and they've made restrictions on the use of that yard. And with all those restrictions in place and the conditions that are in place, it should be that we are quite satisfied as a committee to give support to this business. It's a fantastic looking cafe. I think it's very appealing. I think we need to give the cafe as much chance as possible of remaining profitable, and I therefore feel that there's absolutely no concerns. It's all within officer's recommendation. I'm really happy to support your application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dr. Barclay. Anybody else? Has it been moved and seconded? Councillor Bunting, Councillor Evans, moved and seconded, yes. Moved and seconded, we grant this application. All those in favour of granting, please show. Those against? That application has been granted. Thank you. We're going to go to page 55. That's the Dovecote Business Park, Old Hall Road. Do we have Mr. Rowley or Miss Rowley? We don't. She's not here. We've no With no speakers on this item, it was deferred at the last meeting. Ms Coley is going to give us an introduction.
Thank you, Chairman. Members will recall it was this application was deferred at the previous meeting, and there was a request for further information to be provided in respect of highways, whether a litter management plan could be provided and whether a noise management could be provided. The applicant has responded to those above points with a statement which is set out in full in the officer report at the start of that in the update section. In summary, no further information has been provided in respect of highways, and the applicant maintains that the litter and noise management plans are appropriately dealt with by planning condition, which has always been the suggestion. In respect of highways, the applicant states that the floor space for the extant planning permission is greater than that now proposed, and there would be no additional impact on the highway network. This application is intended only to amend the branding on the building for a different operator. On planning grounds, the applicant's position in this regard is reasonable. Members are reminded of the fallback position that there is an extant planning permission for a very similar development, and that this should be given significant weight in the determination of this application. Consequently, there's no change to the officer recommendation. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Would anybody like to comment? Councillor Jerome.
If at the last meeting last month we discussed some conditions on cycle parking and whether they could be extended, I think there were 2 Sheffield stands, but we discussed possibly having 4, possibly covered as well, because there is a cycle scheme going in place in Sale Water Park, which will pass by this application. It's got a Route A that comes out of Sale Water Park on towards Sale Moor Town Centre, and I think that it got a favourable response last time, so I wonder whether that condition could still be put in place.
If I could just look at the number that's proposed and come back to Councillor Jerome on that point.
Thank you. Well, I had quite a lot to say last time on this, and I was seeking reassurances around traffic and litter and noise, and I can see from the 3 rather shouty, as I would call them, paragraphs at the front of this report that the applicant has chosen not to provide those reassurances because basically they don't have to. Residents around this site were invited to submit comments to this application, and 21 of them did so in good faith, and I was seeking those reassurance on their behalf. Whilst I accept that this application is largely approved, as it was last year before my time on this committee, it feels like a rather frustrating process to have gone through if it's simply being described as a change of branding on the development, to have upset and raised expectations again in the community that their concerns would be taken seriously. Specifically on the litter management plan, the applicant repeats that they operate 5,000 of these units across the country, and that they will provide that with this in a condition. Why they couldn't have provided that beforehand to give us that reassurance, I don't know. I'd like to ask whether the litter management plan will become eventually a public document. The noise management plan, where in shouty paragraph number 3 is they seem to refute entirely that they need to come up with a noise management plan. But I have seen within the officer's report reference to a minimum distance between the audible distance between a speaker and the nearest residential property, and indeed in condition 12 they are required to provide a noise management plan, which is rather contrary to what they've said in their new paragraph additional information. Again, will this noise management plan be made public? And just finally on the highways, I still hold reservations about the impact, the increase in traffic, the potential for the developer to be drawing vehicles from the M60. The knowledge that I have that unit on Dovecote is now let, it gives me concern that this will have more than an insignificant impact on the highways network. I do, however, accept that this has already been largely approved, so that's my position.
Thank you, Councillor Patel. Ms Coley.
On to that. Thank you, Chairman. Yes, both those documents would be submitted as part of a condition discharge application and would appear on the council's website. We wouldn't consult on them because we don't consult on condition discharge applications, but they would be public documents. Oh, yes, sorry, I do. Yes, the report says there's a total of 4 cycle parking spaces anyway, plus 2 motorcycle parking spaces. So your desire for 4 cycle parking spaces is included.
Okay, Councillor Bunting.
Thank you, Chairman. If I remember correctly, one thing I do have in common with Councillor Patel over this item is that I too had quite a bit to say at the last planning application. I shan't repeat it as it's all there on our, as you alluded to at the beginning of the meeting, it's all there on our most exciting, although it's not on our most exciting YouTube channel, is it? Because the computer system broke last time. But regardless of that lack of excitement, I shan't repeat everything that I had to say last night, or we'll be here far too long this evening. The only thing I would just comment on is just the highways issue. It is basically, as people said last time, the impact is 0, not because this site won't attract any traffic, it will, but because we're not viewing it with the base point as nothing. Although there is nothing there, we're viewing it, the base point is the previous application, which is still live. And as Mrs. Coley points out, it is simply a rebranding exercise in many ways. And in fact, as far as I'm aware, and I'll stand open to correction by Mrs. Coley, if through you, Chairman, of course, they could just go ahead with the existing application and then make the changes necessary through permitted development if they wanted to. So this is more of a tidying up exercise and making it so it's clean under one application. Rather than having to build and then do amendments under permitted development. But either way, Chairman, I think this will, as I said last time, be a valuable facility for the area. And to address the point that kept made by Councillor Jerome, I would expect that the site will be doing everything it can to make itself as cycle friendly as possible, because of course that's good business. There's as Councillor Jones points out, there are many cyclists using the area, and attracting as many of them as possible to come and get a coffee and some sort of pastry after their exertions on their bicycles is probably, that's profit. So quite frankly, why on earth wouldn't they want to do all that they could to make cyclists feel welcome? They'd be crazy not to. So with that said, Chairman, I'll simply try and help you push things along by simply proposing that we grant the application as per the report, as there is absolutely no reason not to. Thank you, Chairman.
Ms Coley is going to give us some advice, Councillor.
They couldn't do these alterations in a permitted development, otherwise they would have done. What they could do is build the previous consent, occupy it, and then apply for the minor external alterations to bring it into this form. And then you wouldn't have any consideration of the previous at that point.
Thank you. Councillor Dr. Barclay.
Thank you, Chairman. I really do appreciate Councillor Patel's efforts to really try and improve things for her residents. I totally understand why she made such detailed representations last time and why it needed to be looked at again. But I would like to also say that there's been no further information submitted, but officers actually consider it unreasonable to require them to do so. So I think that kind of the clue to the way we view this application and the inverted commas shouty paragraphs is that it would be unreasonable to expect the applicant to bring anything back. I think we have to be satisfied with the views of our officers. I certainly am, and I'll be supporting this application. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Dr. Barclay. Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Chair. I think I supported this last time, and I'll support it now. But if I may really address Councillor Patel, that office block has been let, and arguably it's going to be 900-seat offices. So actually, it might alleviate the traffic problem because there's 900 people there. They're going to want lunch. They probably won't leave the site if there's a decent store there. Just as a thought for your residents. Otherwise, they're all going to be going out at lunchtime.
Thank you, Councillor Evans. It's been proposed and seconded that we grant this application. All those in favour of granting, please show. Those against? That application has been granted. Thank you. We're going to go to page 131. That's 245 Stockport Road. Any members wish to comment on this item? Councillor Williams. Apologies, Mr. Pearson's going to give us an introduction.
Thank you, Councillor Walsh. As an introduction, this application is essentially a resubmission of a proposed house extension that was approved in June last year, with sole difference relating to minor alterations to the proposed outbuilding. The application is before members because the applicant's council employee. The finish to the building would be rendered blockwork and clay tiles as opposed to cedarwood cladding and concrete tiles as previously approved. Changes to the design, positioning and scale of the windows are also sought. One objection has been received regarding loss of trees, impact on wildlife and impact on views from properties to the rear. The revised appearance of the outbuilding is considered to be acceptable, whilst the proposal is not considered to harm neighbours, and there will be no impact on trees within the site. Recommendation is to grant. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pearson. Any members wish to comment? Councillor Jerome.
Looking at this application, I think they've worked quite hard to make sure the vegetation and the biodiversity is kept intact. So I can't see any reason to reject this application.
Thank you, Councillor Jerome. Councillor Proctor.
Similar, really. I think I don't have any issues with this application. There's no significant impact on amenity. There's one objection on the tree. I think they've addressed that. There's no particular parking issues, so I can't see any planning reasons to refuse this, and I would be accepting it.
Thank you, Councillor Proctor. Anybody else? Has it been moved and seconded that we grant this application? I'd like to propose it, Councillor Jerome. Seconded it, Councillor Proctor. Yeah. Moved and seconded that we grant this application. All those in favour of granting, please show. Anybody against? No, that's unanimous. We're going to go to page 1. Mr. Shaw, apologies for keeping you waiting. If you'd like to take a seat. And that's Unit 5A, Stretford Mall Extension. I need to step out the room for this application. Mr. Shaw, you have 3 minutes.
Will there be a...
Before you start, and I'll leave, Mr. Pearson's going to give us an introduction before you start, Mr. Shaw.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, this application relates to the new-ish Aldi store within Stretford Mall. Condition 7 attached to the original permission in 2015 prevents deliveries outside the hours of 6 AM to 11 PM Monday to Saturday and 8 AM to 8 PM on Sundays and bank holidays. This application seeks to vary that condition to allow for unrestricted delivery hours. Ward councillors have raised concern with regard to potential noise impact on neighbouring residents on Mitford Street. The applicant has demonstrated that deliveries can take place from Kingsway, and pollution and licensing colleagues have indicated that in view of the site location, the servicing route, the fact that nearby noise-sensitive properties are well removed from the site, they don't believe there should be any problem with this proposal. So it's recommended that unrestricted delivery hours are permitted, and the application is approved subject to a revised wording to condition 7, which requires delivery vehicles to enter and leave the site from Kingsway.
Thank you, Mr. Pearson. Mr. Trotter, you just want to make sure your microphone's on, and then you've got 3 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Lee Shaw, and I'm from Avison Young. We act as Aldi's planning consultants across the Northwest and are the agents for this application. This planning application seeks to allow for unrestricted servicing hours for the Aldi food store at Stretford Mall with no other amendments. In terms of planning policy, local planning policy sets out that development should be compatible with the surrounding uses in the area and should not prejudice the amenity of neighbouring properties. The food store is located within Stretford Town Centre and is within Stretford Mall, where main town uses are well and long established. National planning policy sets out that planning decisions should take a positive approach to the management of town centres, ensuring decisions for rapid changes in retail industries are taken into account. Unregistered Unrestricted servicing hours will allow for Aldi to meet the challenges that are faced in their logistical operation, which is vital to keeping the store well stocked, maintained, and attractive to customers. As set out in the officer's report, pollution and licensing have not objected to the planning application. However, we understand that the application is being heard at tonight's committee at the request of councillors who have concerns about the impact of properties on Mitford Street, which is located about 320 foot to the north. During determination of the application, Aldi have cooperated fully with the local planning authority to address the concerns. Aldi has submitted a vehicle tracking plan to illustrate that the route that the vehicles, servicing vehicles would take would not be near residential properties and would use the well-frequented Kingsway route, which also generates significant background noise at all times of day. A planning condition has been recommended to restrict the location of servicing. Whilst this has been put in place due to the permission running with the land and not the operator, Aldi would like to reassure members that Aldi will not service the food store from outside of that dedicated servicing area. Aldi operate a dock leveller system which allows for pallets to be rolled from the HGV straight into the back of house area. That minimises the time to service this store, and it also reduces noise impact. Noise usually associated with servicing also includes warning and reversing noises. Outside of the food store's operational hours, Aldi are and can turn these off and use a banksman to double check that everything is safe when vehicles are reversing. In terms of the benefits, the proposed unrestricted hours will remove traffic from well-trafficked routes at busier periods. So there will be a net minor impact for air quality and a net benefit there. To conclude, taking into account all material considerations, the officer report recommends approval of this plan application. I would therefore respectfully request that members follow the recommendation of their officer. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Shaw. If you just want to turn the microphone off, you can resume your seat. Are there any members happy to? Councillor Patel.
Thank you. I can understand local councillors bringing this report to committee. I think the idea of unrestricted deliveries would raise concerns for them, but I'm reassured, having visited the dedicated service bay area today, which is not one of the more glamorous locations I visited in the borough, that actually the condition that Kingsway is used exclusively to access that will I think with that condition, it's quite a well boxed in area, and I don't think, as the officers say, that residents will be unduly affected by that noise. So I would be supportive of this application.
Thank you. Councillor Bunting, you indicated before.
Yes, thank you, Vice Chairman. Whilst I agree that I'm slightly more perplexed by this one was brought by than Councillor Patel. The area we're talking about is on the other side. Basically, the residents who are saying they're going to be affected are an absolute mile away. On the other side of Kingsway, you're going to have damn fine hearing to be affected by the delivery, and any other roads such as the roads to the rear. Well, they're shielded by the body of the shopping centre itself, so there's going to be no noise that way. So I'm slightly more perplexed as to how on earth this application ended up here this evening. The one thing I will agree with Councillor Patel on, there is no problem with this, and so as she's proposed grant, I'm more than happy to second it. Thank you, Vice Chairman.
Councillor Dr. Barclay.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Okay, so I can understand why the councillor brought it this evening. We all have to represent our residents. That's what we're here for. And if residents are concerned, then they have the absolute right to be represented by councillors. I would just like to thank the representative from Aldi for complying with all the requirements. And if I could ask that the wish list that he added of silencing the reverse noises could be added to the list and complied with, that would be great. Because I think, yes, obviously the residences are some way away, but it's all reassuring for residents, and that's what we want to do. So if that could be added to the list of things that are done, that's great. But I will be supporting the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jerome. You indicated before.
Thank you, Chair. But all my points have been made by Councillor Bunting. So,
is there unanimity of opinion here?
Thank you.
Councillor Proctor.
Yeah, on similar lines, really. When I first looked at this, I thought there were real concerns that residents should have about this, and I was quite concerned about it. But when looking through the plans and looking at the site, I think the impact is going to be pretty much non-existent, really. And I'm really pleased the way the developer has actually worked to try and resolve any issues that we might have. So I think we're quite happy with it, really, and happy to approve it.
Councillor Winstanley, yes.
I hate to break the consensus, but I'm going to talk against this. I know that part of Stratford, it's really busy. There's lots of background noise during peak hour. Once you get outside normal working hours, it is very, very quiet out there. So any trucks coming and going, you will hear them on Mifford Street and you will hear them on Jackson Street. And I listened to the points made by the representatives for Aldi, who talk about being able to restrict the noise of the loading and unloading of vehicles. I have spent far too many hours and years in my career around loading bays, and I would be amazed if you managed to keep down the noise at all. No matter how quietly your deck levelers are, no matter what instructions you give to your loading teams, it's going to be noisy. So I will speak against the application.
Can I take it as proposed by Councillor Patel and seconded by Councillor Bunting?
Yes,
application. Yeah. Is there anyone else looking to speak, or are we happy to take it to a vote? No? Okay. All those in favour? Those against? Okay, that application is carried. Can somebody ask for Councillor Walsh to return?
Okay, so the last item on the agenda is okay, we're going to go to the last application we're going to discuss, if you like, page 139, that's Longford Telephone Exchange, 10 King Street. Councillor Slater had called this application in, I think. Mr Pearson is going to give us an update. Mr Pearson.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, as you say, Councillor Slater had called the application in on behalf of the ward councillors, but having reviewed the plans, the councillors are now satisfied that only some of the glazing panels within the windows are to be removed, and they say they are able to agree the application. So on that basis, Councillor Slater isn't attending tonight. So that was the update there. Just a short introduction to the planning application. It relates to the BT telephone exchange adjacent to Stratford Knoll. And the proposal seeks to remove some of the glazed panels within one window on the first floor and 3 windows on the second floor, and replace the glass with galvanised steel louvers for ventilation purposes. The louvers will match those already introduced on the building. The building is considered to be a non-designated heritage asset, but officers, including the council's heritage development officer, do not consider the proposals would adversely affect the character of the building or harm its significance. The application is therefore recommended for approval.
Thank you, Mr Pearson. Anybody like to comment? Councillor Bunting.
Nothing to say, Chairman, just to move it on for you, propose grant as per recommendation. Well, grant with conditions as per recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Bunting. Anybody else? Councillor Minnis.
Right, yeah. Very, very minor thing. I mean, I'm happy to approve it, but the postcode was wrong in the papers that were given. It's 8AE. It's not 8NS, but that's a minor thing. It's just an FYI. That's all.
We'd have taken that from the National Address Gazetteer, so it might if it clashes with your sat nav, then
no. If you put that postcode in, to find out where the area is. It's not the same thing. If you actually then type in the address into postcode finder, it's 8AE.
Okay.
The address is by Royal Mail. I'm guessing they've got it right.
Yeah, well, ours is from the Land and Property Gazetteer, which is the same thing, so that seems a bit strange to me. Okay.
Quite weird.
Councillor Bunting.
Just to help sat-nav users for future applications, I do agree with Councillor Minnis. On numerous times, the postcode quoted in the planning application has been one different to the valid address and has taken you to the wrong place. So maybe planning could maybe switch to an alternative system. Just thought I'd mention it. Thank you, Chairman.
That is noted, Councillor Bunting. It's been moved. Has it been seconded? I think Councillor Minnis has seconded it. That we grant this application. All those in favour of granting, please show. Is anybody against? No, that is unanimous. We had another item that's been withdrawn, page 103, that's land adjacent to Heather Lee Green Walk, Bowden. Do you need to comment on this, Ms. Coley?
I don't need to introduce it. I just need members to note with a show of hands that they're happy for that to be withdrawn. Thank you.
Okay, that's it, everybody. Thank you. And Councillor Dr. Barker is going to comment. Thank you.
Could I ask through you, please, Chair, will this application be returning or do we not know at this point? Okay, all right, thank you.
Councillor Cording, you want to comment?
Just a slight niggle. I cycled all the way up there yesterday. When was this withdrawn?
Thank you, Councillor Cordingley. Councillor Proctor wants to comment.
Sorry, Chair, just a separate point. When myself and Councillor Winstanley went out for the Urmston planning up, we couldn't call back in. So can we make sure in future that happens? No one called us back into the meeting and we missed the start of the next application.
Thank you, Councillor Proctor. We'll try and remember that in future. Okay, nobody else wants to comment. Thank you, everybody, and good night. Thank you.